Hello, everyone. Today we're going to explore a true story that will make you question everything about trust and family ties. Names and details have been changed to protect their privacy. Have you ever been accused of something so shameful, so unforgivable, that it tore apart every piece of your life? Imagine being blamed for betraying your own husband by the very woman who was supposed to treat you like a daughter. This is the story of how my mother-in-law destroyed my reputation and tried to ruin my family with a single, devastating lie. And yes, it all started with a DNA test, a test that was supposed to bring peace, but instead brought chaos no one could have imagined. My name is Anna. I was just an ordinary daughter-in-law trying to fit in, trying to love and support my husband, David, in every way possible. From the moment I married into his family, I knew his mother was a force to be reckoned with, sharp-tongued, controlling, and stubborn to her very bones. She rarely showed warmth toward me, but I convinced myself she would come around eventually. After all, I had done nothing wrong, but the moment I gave birth to our son, Ethan, everything changed. At first, she seemed delighted, doting. Even until one day, I overheard her muttering to a neighbor that the baby didn't resemble David. That whisper planted the seed for everything that followed. At first, David laughed it off. He trusted me, and I clung to that trust like a lifeline. But slowly, the poison spread. Little remarks, careless suspicions, and harmless jokes from his mother began to take root in his mind. It all felt like a dream, turning into a nightmare. I wanted to scream, to shake them both awake, to prove that I was loyal, faithful, and true. Then came the day she insisted on a DNA test. She wrapped it in the softest words just to put everyone's mind at ease. Dear, but her eyes were cold, hard, unblinking. David gave to her pressure, and I went along because I had nothing to hide. If a test could silence her, I thought, then let's do it. I remember waiting for those results, clinging to my baby while praying this would all be over soon. I didn't sleep for days. Not because I was afraid of the truth, but because I was terrified of what they would do, with even a sliver of doubt. In my heart, I believed David would protect me, that he would see reason if the results confirmed what I already knew Ethan was his son, through and through. But when the envelope arrived, I saw something in his eyes I had never seen before, something that cut deeper than a knife. Betrayal, rage, disgust. My mother-in-law was practically trembling with glee as she snatched the results from his hands and read them aloud. A gleeful executioner pronouncing my guilt, not a match. She spat, almost savoring it. I told you she was a liar. The room spun. The walls seemed to close in on me. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't even hold my baby because my arms went numb. David turned away from me. A stranger? In that moment? As if he had never loved me at all. How could this be? How could something I knew with every cell of my body be twisted into a lie? That was the moment I realized I was alone. Completely. Devastatingly alone. And you, yes, you watching this? What would you do if the person you trusted most suddenly looked at you like a traitor? How would you survive a betrayal so deep it stole the breath from your lungs? Stay with me. The truth behind this nightmare is far worse than you think. The days after that test felt like a funeral for my marriage. David barely spoke to me. And when he did, his words dripped with suspicion. I would catch him staring at Ethan, searching for features that matched his own, and then looking back at me with pure disgust. It was as if every memory we had shared was suddenly worthless, tainted by that one piece of paper. My mother-in-law, meanwhile, seemed almost reborn. She walked around the house with her head held high, as if she had been proven right about me all along. She took every opportunity to twist the knife deeper, whispering behind my back, but always loud enough for me to hear. "Liars always get found out," she'd say, shaking her head with mock pity. Sometimes I would hear her on the phone, bragging to relatives about how she had saved her son from a shameful, unfaithful wife. The poison spread through the family like wildfire. Cousins, aunts, even old family friends began looking at me with the same suspicious, accusing eyes. No one asked for my side of the story. No one cared that my heart was breaking, but what hurt worst was David. I could see how torn he was. A part of him wanting to believe me, but another part completely under his mother's spell. That part grew stronger every day. He began to sleep in the guest room, avoiding my touch, refusing to talk through any of it. I tried to reach him, to reason with him, to remind him of the love we had built together. "David, look at me," I begged one night, tears streaming down my face. "You know me. You know I would never do this to you." He wouldn't even meet my eyes. My mother wouldn't lie. He muttered, voice dead and cold. Those words felt like a slap across the face. I was drowning in a sea of doubt, and no one was throwing me a lifeline. Even Ethan, my beautiful boy, became a pawn in this ugly battle. My mother-in-law refused to let me be alone with him, always hovering close by, as if she thought I might run away with a child who didn't even belong to their bloodline in her mind. Anyway, there were nights I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering how everything could have gone so horribly wrong. I was a faithful wife, a loving mother. And yet, here I was, treated worse than a criminal. Every morning, I had to look into the mirror and remind myself I was not what they claimed. I was not an adulteress. I was not a liar. But saying it to myself was not enough to change the world around me. One afternoon, as I was folding laundry, I overheard my mother-in-law planting more venom in David's ear. "You can find another woman, David," she was saying. "Someone who will respect this family and not shame you. Someone worthy of your love." That was when I realized what she truly wanted, not just to punish me, but to erase me. She wanted me gone, cast out like trash, so she could rebuild her perfect fantasy for David. You know, listening to this, you might wonder, why didn't I just leave? Why stay in a house that had turned into a prison? The answer is simple, Ethan. My little boy was everything to me. And if I left without a fight, I knew I'd lose him. My mother-in-law would twist the courts the same way she twisted David. She'd paint me as an unfaithful woman and steal my son from me. So I stayed, as every day grew darker, determined to hold on until I could find a way to expose the truth. And if you were in my place, what would you have done? Walked away, or fought back? No matter how impossible it seemed, keep watching, because what happened next will prove just how far a mother-in-law's hatred can go. I began to live every moment like a soldier behind enemy lines. Every smile was forced, every word carefully chosen. The house felt haunted not by ghosts, but by suspicion, rage, and the chilling silence between me and David. My mother-in-law tightened her grip on everything. She decided what Ethan ate, what clothes he wore, even how I should hold him. Every day she found a new way to humiliate me, and I learned to hide my tears behind a polite nod. There were moments I felt a burning temptation to scream the truth at the top of my lungs. But I knew it would be useless. No one was listening. No one wanted to listen. Instead, I tried to gather small pieces of evidence. I started watching my mother-in-law more closely, noticing how she guarded the DNA paperwork as if it were treasure. She kept it locked in a drawer in her bedroom. And one night, when she had gone out to visit a friend, I worked up the courage to sneak in and look for it. My hands were shaking as I found the envelope. My stomach twisted when I pulled out the paper and saw my name printed there. But something was off. I couldn't quite put my finger on it until I noticed the date of birth. It was wrong. I had never given them that information, and yet there it was, typed up, looking perfectly official. The realization hit me like an electric shock. She had faked it, or changed it. Somehow, she had gotten her hands on the test results before anyone else could see them, and swapped the numbers, the names, the dates, everything to fit her poisonous fantasy. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. I wanted to run to David, to show him, to finally prove my innocence. But a voice inside me warned that it wouldn't work yet. I needed more than a suspicion. I needed undeniable proof. Because if I confronted them too early, she would find a way to spin it back on me. So, I put the paper back, hands trembling, and slipped out of her room before she returned. That night, I lay in bed, wide awake, replaying every moment since Ethan's birth. The sly smiles, the forced kindness, the whispers. It was all part of her plan. A web, carefully woven to trap me. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something different. Not just fear, but anger. A hot, pulsing rage that burned away the numbness. I had been silent for too long. If she wanted a war, she would get one. In the days that followed, I began asking quiet questions. I called the lab that had supposedly handled the test and gently probed about the procedure. I spoke to one of David's cousins, who had studied genetics in college, to ask what a real report should look like. I even searched online to compare authentic DNA reports with the one my mother-in-law had waved in my face, piece by piece. The puzzle came together, and the more I learned, the clearer it became. She had orchestrated the entire thing to destroy me. I had no one on my side, no one to trust. But I had the truth, and sometimes that's all you need to keep going. If you were me, knowing your own mother-in-law had forged evidence to tear apart your family, could you stay calm? Could you stay patient? Waiting for the right moment to strike? Keep listening, because the moment to fight back was closer than I ever expected. The day everything shifted started out so ordinary, it felt almost cruel. I remember pouring cereal for Ethan, watching him giggle at a silly cartoon. And for a second, I pretended we were just A normal, happy family. But normal was a lie. And happiness was a stranger in this house. Later that morning, my mother-in-law was bragging on the phone again, telling someone how the little bastard didn't belong to their family, and how she had saved David from my supposed betrayal. Hearing her say that about my son broke something in me. It was as if the last shred of fear turned to stone in my chest. I couldn't live in the shadows anymore. Then, in the middle of her cruel gloating, she slipped. She laughed a little too loudly, boasting. I switched those results right under her nose. I froze. My blood turned to ice. She had admitted it right there, in the kitchen. Without realizing, I was standing just around the corner. My breath was shallow, my heart pounding like a drum. I forced myself to stay silent, to keep listening. She bragged about bribing a lab tech, about making sure no one would ever question the paperwork. She even mocked David for being too gullible to suspect her. It was the confession I had prayed for, handed to me on a silver platter. But a confession alone wouldn't be enough. I needed to catch her in the act. After she hung up, I slipped back to my room and pulled out my phone, hands shaking. If she was bold enough to talk about it once, she might talk about it again. I was ready this time. I turned on the voice recorder and waited over the next few days. I baited her with carefully chosen words, pretending to break down, pretending to beg her for forgiveness for something I never did. The more I acted guilty, the more she gloated, repeating her twisted story of how she had protected the family honor by faking the test. Every word burned into my heart like acid. But I kept recording, building my case, piece by piece. At night, I would listen back to those recordings, tears streaming down my face as I heard her cold, triumphant voice. I couldn't believe that someone who had held my son, who had smiled at me on my wedding day, could be this monstrous still. Doubt haunted me. Would David believe me, even if I had proof? Or would he cling to her lies because it was easier than admitting she had betrayed him? 2. That question kept me awake until dawn. One night, lying beside Ethan, I watched him breathe softly in his sleep. His tiny chest rising and falling was the only thing that kept me grounded. For his sake, I had to keep fighting. I had to believe the truth would set us both free. And then, almost like fate stepping in, a friend from my old workplace called me, asking why I hadn't been around. I broke down and told her everything. She was furious on my behalf. And for the first time, I felt a hand reaching back to pull me from the darkness. Get a second test, she urged. Do it somewhere she can't touch. The idea was so simple. It was brilliant. I made a plan. I would sneak Ethan out, get a new DNA test, and once I had the real results, there would be no more doubts, no more room for her poisonous lies. What would you do? Hearing the woman who should protect your child proudly admit she tried to destroy him? Could you forgive? Or would you burn her world to the ground? Stay with me, because my moment of reckoning was finally here. I planned everything down to the smallest detail. I waited for a day when my mother-in-law had a doctor's appointment across town, and David would be at work. I packed a small diaper bag for Ethan, slipped some cash into my pocket, and told the housekeeper I was taking him for a walk. My heart was hammering so hard I thought it might give me away. But I forced a calm smile. I went straight to a private clinic on the other side of the city, a place my mother-in-law had never even heard of. I explained my situation to the lab technician, not every detail, just enough for them to understand how important it was that these results stay confidential. The tech looked at me with quiet sympathy, nodding as she promised no one else would see them. Ethan was so brave, barely crying when they took the sample. I held his tiny hand the whole time, silently praying this would finally be the key to ending our nightmare. The waiting nearly drove me insane. I went back home, trying to act normal, trying to keep my breathing steady when my mother-in-law returned that evening. I felt like I had a ticking bomb hidden in my chest. Days blurred together, every minute stretching into an hour. Finally, the results came in. My hands shook so violently that I could barely open the envelope. But there it was, in black and white. Ethan was David's son. 99% match. There was no mistake. I sank to my knees on the bedroom floor, sobbing, relief crashing over me like a tidal wave. But that relief didn't last long, because the truth alone wasn't enough. I had to make David see it. And he was so far gone, so wrapped up in his mother's story, that I didn't know how to reach him. I waited until one evening after dinner. David was in the living room watching TV while my mother-in-law played with Ethan. I took a deep breath, my pulse pounding in my ears, and stepped into the room. "I need to talk to you," I told David, my voice steady, even though my insides were shaking. He barely looked at me. "About what?" I pulled the fresh DNA report from my pocket, placing it in front of him. "About the truth." My mother-in-law's head snapped up like a snake sensing danger. "What is that?" she spat. "It's the real test," I said. "From a clinic you don't control." David looked at me, confused. Then down at the paper. I watched his eyes scan the results, saw his mouth open and close, struggling to understand. My mother-in-law lunged forward, trying to grab it. But I stepped in her way. "Read it, David," I insisted, my voice trembling but firm. "Read every word." He did. And I saw something shift in his face. Something crumbling under the weight of the truth. My mother-in-law was already spinning, reaching for her next lie. But I was ready. I pulled out my phone and hit play, letting the recording of her confession fill the silent room. The sound of her own voice, bragging about faking the first test, was like a hammer shattering glass. David looked at his mother, his jaw slack, horror spreading across his features. "Why?" he whispered, voice shaking. "Why would you do this?" she stammered, trying to reach for him. But he stepped back as if she'd burned him. For the first time in months, I felt something like hope. But this was just the beginning. Because once the truth is out, the wounds it reveals can be even deeper than the lies. If you were me, would you have trusted David to stand by you after seeing how easily he turned against you? Or would you still doubt his love? Stay close, because the fallout was about to get even uglier. David looked like a man who had been struck by lightning. His eyes darted between me, the paper, and the phone replaying his mother's confession on an endless loop. He tried to speak, but the words died on his tongue. I watched his face twist with guilt, confusion, and a fear so raw it made me shiver. My mother-in-law was still grasping for control, trying to rewrite the truth even as it bled out into the open. She forced me. She screamed. pointing a trembling finger at me. She manipulated me. David. She was trying to break up this family. The desperation in her voice was almost pitiful. But there was no pity left in me. I felt cold, hard. A wall that she couldn't scale anymore. I stood my ground. Voice low and steady. You lied. You tried to destroy me. And you nearly succeeded, for a moment. Everything was silent except for Ethan's baby babble. Oblivious to the hurricane tearing through the room, David finally turned to me. Tears spilling down his face. Anna. He choked. I'm so sorry. I should have believed you. I didn't know what to say. The apology was too little, too late. But it was all I'd ever wanted to hear. I closed my eyes, feeling the burn of months of humiliation finally loosen its hold. My mother-in-law sank to her knees, a broken shell of the tyrant she'd once been, and began to sob. But there was no satisfaction in seeing her collapse, just a hollow ache for everything that had been lost. The rest of the night was a blur. David tried to talk to me, to explain why he had trusted his mother over me, but every excuse cut deeper. I had been alone, abandoned, and even though the truth was now clear, the scars would stay with me forever. Will you forgive me? He asked quietly, voice shaking. I wanted to say yes. Part of me even meant it. But another part of me was still screaming, still raw, still bleeding. I don't know. I whispered. I don't know if I can. He nodded, accepting that answer. And maybe that was the first step toward healing. My mother-in-law, however, refused to give up so easily. In the days that followed, she tried to win David back to her side, spinning new stories, crying, pretending to be the victim. But David had finally opened his eyes, and no amount of tears could blind him again. We decided to move out. There was no way I could keep living under the same roof with a woman who had tried to destroy me and my son. David helped me back, moving with a quiet determination that felt more like penance than love. As we loaded the car, I looked back at that house, the place where my dreams had died and been reborn, and felt nothing. No sadness, no nostalgia. Just a cold, hard resolve. Some families can heal after a betrayal like that. Ours would never be the same. That night, in our tiny rented apartment, I lay awake next to David, listening to Ethan breathe, and wondered what would come next. Could I ever truly trust David again? Would Ethan grow up asking why there was a wall between us? One we couldn't quite tear down. I didn't know. But at least we were free. And for now, that had to be enough. If someone you loved betrayed you so deeply, could you ever open your heart again? Or would that wound stay forever? Hold on. Because the lessons I learned after leaving that house changed me in ways I never imagined. The first weeks in our new apartment felt like living in a fog. There were moments when I almost reached for the phone to call my mother-in-law out of old habit, before remembering what she had done. Other times, I would catch David staring at me, silently searching my face for forgiveness he hadn't yet earned. Ethan adjusted faster than either of us. He laughed at the strange echo in our empty living room, played with cardboard boxes, and seemed to sense the tension had eased. Watching him giggle reminded me why I'd fought so hard and why I had to keep going. No matter how exhausted I felt, David tried to help. He took on feedings, changed diapers, cooked dinner, anything to make me see he was sorry. I appreciated it, truly, but there was still a canyon between us. Each time he touched my shoulder or tried to hug me, I would flinch without meaning to. That made him wince. And then we'd both fall silent, lost in separate worlds. At night, I would replay everything in my head. How easily he had doubted me, how quickly he had stepped away. That pain still woke me up some nights, a cold dread soaking through my bones. And every time, I asked myself the same question: if he could believe his mother once, what would stop him from doing it again? David noticed. Of course, one night, after Ethan was asleep, he sat down across from me, eyes red and hollow. "Anna," he said, voice cracking, "I know I failed you. I will do anything to fix this. Anything." I looked at him, really looked, and saw the man I'd fallen in love with, buried under months of shame and confusion. Maybe he deserved a second chance. Maybe we both did. "I don't know how to trust you again," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. He reached for my hand, then let me earn it. However long it takes. His sincerity broke something in me, a dam I'd built to survive. I let myself cry, and he held me, trembling as hard as I was. That night was the first time I believed we might find a way forward, not back to what we had, but forward to something rebuilt, something stronger. My mother-in-law tried to call, to apologize in her twisted way, but I blocked her number. I couldn't let her voice poison us again. David agreed, though it clearly hurt him to shut out his own mother. I respected that pain, but refused to let it guide our decisions. We started seeing a counselor, piecing through the wreckage together. It was slow. It was agonizing. But it was honest. And honesty, after so many lies, felt like breathing fresh air for the first time in forever. Ethan became our anchor. Every time we wanted to give up, we looked at him, remembering who we were fighting for. If you were in my shoes, could you rebuild after something so ugly? Or would you walk away and never look back? Keep listening. Because even though the worst was behind me, the lessons had only just begun. Life slowly started to settle into a new kind of rhythm, though the scars were still there, raw and aching. David and I worked every day to rebuild the trust we had lost. Sometimes it felt impossible, like trying to piece together a shattered vase. But other times, there were glimpses of hope. Small things, a smile, a kind gesture, a shared laugh over Ethan's silly games, reminded me why I hadn't given up. David was patient. He didn't push, didn't demand my forgiveness. He simply showed up, over and over, proving with his actions that he was willing to put in the work. That steadiness began to ease something locked tight in my chest. Though I doubted I would ever be the same naive woman who once trusted without question. My mother-in-law tried to send letters long, rambling apologies mixed with excuses. I didn't answer. I couldn't. There was nothing left to say. And any forgiveness she might someday earn would be between her and her own conscience, not mine. Sometimes I wondered what had broken inside her. to make her do something so cruel? Was it jealousy, fear of losing her son? Or just a twisted hunger for power and control? Maybe I would never know. We stayed in the apartment for months, away from the toxic memories of that old house. Ethan grew fast, babbling more words each day, blissfully unaware of the family war that had nearly stolen him from me. There were nights when I still woke up shaking, haunted by the sound of my mother-in-law reading those forged results aloud, her voice triumphant and cold. But every time I looked at Ethan, his soft hair, his gentle breathing, I found a reason to keep moving forward. The counseling helped. We confronted everything: the doubts, the betrayals, the ways David had abandoned me without a fight. I screamed, I cried, I cursed him until my throat was raw. And he listened, truly listened, holding all my anger without trying to defend himself. That was what began to heal us. Slowly, painfully, but honestly. One evening, as we watched Ethan sleep, David squeezed my hand and whispered, "I will never doubt you again. Even if the whole world turns against you." I wanted to believe him. I think a part of me did. But another part would always carry the knowledge of how close I had come to losing everything, not because of some stranger, but because of someone I once called family. I have changed. I am not the same woman who walked into that marriage, eager to please, blind to the darkness people can hide in their hearts. I am stronger now, wiser, and maybe a little harder. If you take one thing from my story, let it be this: no one has the right to steal your truth, no matter how powerful they seem, no matter how alone they make you feel. You have the right to stand up and fight for your name, your child, and your dignity. Would you have had the strength to fight, to believe in yourself, when everyone else turned their back? I hope you never have to find out. But if you do, remember my voice, telling you that you can survive it. You can survive anything. Thank you for listening to my story. In this painful, deeply personal journey, I was accused of the worst betrayal a wife can face: cheating on my husband. My mother-in-law, consumed by her own fears and resentments, secretly swapped DNA results to frame me, tearing apart my marriage and my reputation. Isolated and shamed, I found the courage to investigate and ultimately exposed her cruel scheme, proving my son was truly David's child. Even then, the damage to our family was devastating. David and I had to rebuild from nothing, with counseling and raw honesty, as I struggled to forgive both his mother's cruelty and his own weakness. We moved away to start over, cutting ties with the woman who had nearly destroyed us. Though trust is fragile and my scars will never fully heal, I learned to stand for myself and my child, no matter how powerful my enemies seemed. This experience changed me forever, shaping me into a stronger, more vigilant version of myself. To anyone hearing this, never let another person rewrite your truth. Defend it fiercely, even if you stand alone. Because one day, your courage may be the only thing that saves you and your family from the darkness.